And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Chair Weisenmiller up to the podium to get our panel kick-started. Great, thank you. Good morning. Welcome to Sacramento. Welcome to our California Climate Change Symposium. This forum is coming at a critical time certainly for all of us in California and throughout the globe. I think the major challenge we're facing is obviously climate. In looking forward to how do we react to climate change, both in terms of mitigation measures and adaptation. And at the same time, California is already seeing the impact of climate disruption. Many people challenge whether it's spring or whether it's something for our grandchildren or for polar bears. And the answer is it's now. It's certainly, you can see the effects. And one of the basic messages, and one of the reasons why this gathering today is so important, is that California really has based its programs around the science. And, we really reach out to the science, and we've organized. Energy Commission has had 3 climate assessments. We're now in our 4th. And that science has really been the basis for our programs. And certainly as we look now in California at SB 350, we look at the governor's executive order, we look at the state of the state, that's really based upon what we see we have to do right now to address climate issues. And again, one of the things that's really important for us to bring all of you together is to continue that connection between science and the research in our programs and our policies. And as we move forward, all of us look to Paris this year, and certainly this gathering is a step of that road to Paris in terms of the organization we have to do. And obviously, I'm not only the chair of the Energy Commission, but I'm also the scientist on the commission. And the answer is we scientists need to reach out at this point and communicate that science to the public to really provide the basis for successful action in Paris. One of the initiatives we are taking as a state going towards Paris is the Below 2 MOU that we're trying to, so far we have pulled together 18 jurisdictions, subnational. We're certainly trying to pull together many more between here and Paris. But the notion is that we need to make strong commitments to address climate issues now and try to keep the temperature change below 2 degrees. And so that's a very big challenge for all of us. Certainly California, we have a message we need to share with the world. California is responsible for 1% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So that the basic messaging is that we can demonstrate here that you can have a very vibrant economy and at the same time address climate issues. And we have done that throughout the arc of the governor's first 2 terms and current 2 terms. As governor, we have led the way in how to address climate issues with energy efficiency, renewables, and now transforming our transportation sector. But we need to do more, and we need to be reaching out. But if you look at the messaging we're having to people and what you can do, between 2012 and 2013, we have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 1.5 metric tons, much of which occurred because of the electricity sector. At that time, we basically doubled our renewables, and we halved our coal consumption between 2018 and 2013. And right now, our power system is running at a level in greenhouse gas emissions 20% below 1990 levels. And indeed, that's just a step. We're certainly going to go well beyond that, looking between now and 2030. But the messages that we all need to do is to reach out internationally. I've just been in China for a week. I'm looking forward to going to Mexico next week. And part of that is basically reaching out across the globe to organize everyone to deal with the challenges and the opportunities represented by Paris, but then to move beyond Paris to implementation. Paris is a step for where we need to go. It's not the end point. And we need to really move forward. We need to integrate. California has really shown what we can do in the area of mitigation, and we will do much more between now and 2030 under the governor's leadership in looking at the legislative action. But we also need to be addressing more climate adaptation. We need to continue being the testing ground and showing that it's possible to both grow our economy at a vibrant rate while addressing greenhouse gas issues and starting to confront the challenge of climate. We really need to act now to really avoid tipping points. And then we really need to act on a global basis, and it really needs to be grounded in sound science. So we appreciate everyone being here today. Let's move on to our first panel.
Thank you very much, and I'm really honored to be included in this extremely timely session. Just as a brief opening remark, we all know since the last 150 years, up to 1970, we already emitted about 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide in the air. And it took us another 40 years, from 1970 to 2010, for the additional trillion tons. We already emitted 2 trillion tons. About 50% of that stays up in the air. And if you follow IPCC, that 1 trillion ton which is already in the air has committed the planet to 1.5 degrees warming. Okay? We haven't seen not all of that. Currently, we are emitting about 40 trillion tons every year. So it's going to take us only another 20 to 22 years to put the 3rd trillion. And another 18 years, the 4th trillion. So by 2050, if we continue on business as usual, we would have put about 4 trillion tons. Imagine that. And 2 trillion tons would stay up there for a century. That alone would have committed the planet to a 3-degree warming. It's all by 2050. And many of us were thinking about 2-degree warming starting from the IPCC days when I was involved in that 1990s. That we were thinking we're going to prevent 2-degree warming from happening by 2100. But my own prediction about 8-10 years ago, which IPCC has come to a similar conclusion, that 2-degree warming is staring at us 35 years from now, not 100 years. Okay? So, some of the major things, just talking about what it means to California, there's been a recent set of studies, the UC system led it, UC Irvine and UCSD, that the West Antarctic ice sheet is in an unstable melting stage. So the IPCC projection was a meter sea level rise. When you bring in the West Antarctic, just that part which is unstable melting, we're looking at 2 meters sea level rise by end of this century. So I think time has come. I wrote a letter about this to Governor Brown, that we have to start thinking about what sort of coastal infrastructures, particularly our airports, my own airport in San Diego and San Francisco, at what sea level do we have to relocate them? We are facing such questions. Then come to the drought. And of course, the last 4 years drought, we blame it on precipitation, but we shouldn't forget an insidious change which is happening. Every degree rise in temperature, I'm using Celsius, but the fundamental thermodynamic law is called Clausius-Clapeyron law. That says evaporation would increase by 7% to 20%. So no matter what the rainfall does, we are steadily going down the hill in terms of evaporation. And the second thing is more of the rain, more of the precipitation would fall as rain. So there is a chronic tendency to make California drier, and that's just going to get worse and worse. And when precipitation comes, it'll pull us out. When it doesn't come, we'll go deeper in the hole. Every year it's happening. So there's local to home. And moving on, I want to address the environmental justice issue. It's an issue I've been working last 5 to 10 years since I joined the Vatican as in the Pontifical Academy of Science, one of the members, is that to the extent these climate change, CO2 is lingering for centuries to 1,000 years, we are leaving this climate change for generations yet unborn. So bring some intergenerational equity. The second thing, which is I'm closely working on that, is the intra-generational equity. There are 3 billion people on the planet who still have not discovered fossil fuels. They either don't have access to it or they can't afford it. And their contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is 5%, the entire 3 billion. And we all know they're going to suffer the worst consequences of climate change. And in addition to the 3 billion, there is an additional billion, which Pope Francis calls socially excluded. California has a generous share of them. And they're all living in slums or whatever. So they're going to suffer the worst consequences of climate change, even among Californians. And that's why I'm so proud the state is taking some of the cap and trade funds and targeting homeless communities and poor communities. So it's become a huge moral issue. And that's exactly what's being taken at the church, at the Vatican. As many of you know, Pope Francis released this encyclical, and it's called Laudato Si. It's on climate change and environment, what we are doing to the planet, how we have become a thrown-away culture. And as one of the council members, this is the most prestigious academy in the world, only 80 members. A third of them are Nobel laureates. There are a few ordinary people like me in that academy. And I teamed up with a famous economist at Cambridge and organized a meeting in 2014. It was called Sustainable Nature, Sustainable Humanity, Our Responsibility. And we had the world's top thought leaders coming to that meeting. Philosophers, theologians, physicists, chemists, biologists, glaciologists. At the end of the 3-day meeting, we came to a remarkably simple conclusion that the only way we're going to change or solve this problem of environment and climate change, it requires a fundamental change in our attitude towards each other. Remember I talked about intergenerational, people are still unborn, and intragenerational. So we need to change our attitude towards each other, and we need to fundamentally change our attitude towards nature. Nature is just not to take, we also have to give back. That was the conclusion that group came into. And since then, I'm very pleased to say that with the release of the encyclical, in our war on climate change, there seems to be an alliance forming between science, religion, and policy. I myself was 3 weeks ago in a meeting at UC Irvine with the Dalai Lama. He talked about the same thing. And just 2 weeks ago in Turkey, the leaders of Islam got together. A remarkably similar statement to what Pope Francis said, please, and acknowledging Pope Francis. So we are so excited that this issue of climate and environment is unifying science, religion, and policy. Just 3 weeks ago, on July 21st, Pope Francis organized a major summit of mayors of the world. I was part of that meeting, and our Governor Jerry Brown came and just, lifted the house up with his speech. It became clear at that meeting, and many mayors at the summit. We have mayors from Stockholm, London, etc. They all commented to me that some of them, not all of them, that California is becoming a beacon for the world. And that's why I'm truly excited to be part of this meeting. And I think of the line between adaptation and mitigation is really blurring. Part of adaptation could be mitigation. So I'm really excited to be part of this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's start the conversation. I was going to actually just help frame things a little bit by reminding people of the key findings of the third climate assessment. And again, I've indicated that one should understand that California's climate is already being disrupted. And in terms of the examples coming from that third climate assessment, first, the temperature in California is 2 degrees warmer than it was in 1890. Second, certainly our snowpack is less, and so we no longer have the convenience of storing storing water in the mountains until we need it most for the power system. But in fact, we're looking at potentially the combination of not just hotter but drier, and the combination of the two is pretty bad. You know, if you look at, obviously we had no snowpack this year in California. If you look at the Northwest, it had average rain, but because it was warmer, they have no snowpack. So again, that combination. In terms of fires,
and by the way, our snowpack is 2% this year of normal.
2%. In terms of fires, we used to have one really bad fire every 10 years. If you look at the top 20 worst fires in California's history, 13 of those have been in the last decade. And it seems like every year it's worse and worse. At this point, we have fires, a ring of fires through California. As the governor said, it's just a tinderbox out there. And every worker we have available is now on the fire lines. Many of them have been there for a solid month. So again, and at the same time, we have sea level rise, particularly with winter storms, and we have subsidence in areas. Certainly the Bay Delta, certainly the Central Valley. So that combination of sea level rise and subsidence is certainly a fairly potent mixture. So again, the basic message is that certainly it's now that we're already seeing climate disruption, and we need to take action to limit the amount of the climate disruption. So I think the first question for both my panelists is, what do both of you see as the most important next steps in California's mitigation and adaptation strategies?
Well, I'll start, and I want to thank you for inviting a lawyer to be on the panel and addressing this group of scientists. And I want to echo what Chair Weisenmuller and Professor Ramanathan said about how wonderful it is to have this convening. These are stellar events, and we haven't had one in several years, but it's so terrific that we have continuing this tradition and have this event this year. As Chair Weisenmuller said, we are proceeding both right now in mitigating our impacts and trying to adapt to them, and we're leading the nation in both areas. We're making a lot of progress, as you heard, on meeting our current AB 32 goals for mitigation, and we're embarked on an ambitious effort to go further to deal with a 2030 midterm goal. The governor issued an executive order calling for a 40% reduction below 1990 levels by 2030, which is the most aggressive anywhere, and certainly in this country. And there are 5 main pillars that underlie that effort, including renewable energy. We want to get to, he's called for getting to 50% renewables by 2030, doubling of the rate of energy efficiency savings in existing buildings by then, a reduction in petroleum use for motor vehicles of 50% by 2030, which is also critical to meet our health-based Clean Air Act goals, making our natural and working lands sinks for carbon and dealing with short-lived climate pollutants. And we're working on all of those both administratively, and there's important legislation pending that hopefully the legislature will pass that gives statutory teeth to those goals. So those are all very, very big objectives. There's a lot of public processes involved, and that is the next big step in those areas. The Air Resources Board will be starting on a scoping plan update later in the fall to update the current scoping plan, which went out to 2020. Mitigation, adaptation, resilience, climate preparedness goes hand in hand with that effort. We adopted the first multi-sectoral adaptation strategy in 2009, and we updated that in 2014 with the Safeguarding California Plan. Many of you helped with that and are quite familiar with that. It's probably the most far-reaching adaptation strategy in the country. And then in April, in the executive order, the governor gave some very clear guidance how to implement that executive order that we're hard at work trying to do right now. And he directed agencies throughout the state government to take climate change into account in all planning and investment decisions, including big infrastructure planning. We have a 5-year infrastructure plan that dictates where we spend lots of money in the state. Those have to consider climate change. And he said in 9 sectors, identify the impacts in California, the risks, and come up with priority actions to deal with the risks. The leads have a due date of September to come up with these implementation strategies. The plan has to be updated every 3 years. Importantly, and of interest to some of you here, the order establishes a technical advisory committee chaired by the Office of Planning and Research, which is an open and inclusive process designed to give us the best information about how state agencies should go about doing this planning and investment, how to measure progress, what kind of metrics we should use. And the executive order explicitly calls out the fact that California should continue its rigorous its climate science research program in order to further study the impacts of climate change and how best to prepare for that. So those are very important, complementary, ambitious goals, and both undergirded by science.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Weisenmiller. I want to pick up this theme of California serving as a beacon for the world. As we heard, our emission is only 1%. So when it's important that we reduce our emissions, but I think the real power of that is really using that, taking that knowledge, and showing that to the world that mitigating climate change is not going to ruin our economy. It's not going to push us back to the Stone Ages. If any, it's just pushing us, propelling us forward. So I think in this, taking this message, just not the message, but also we need to take our experience in governing, the governance issue, technology, and science, and start collaborations with the rest of the planet, particularly China. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? I didn't say anything important so far.
He was just praising Bob and me, that's all.
Right. So what I was proposing in terms of what is it we can do is that I'm thinking, we have some of the best university systems in the State University of California and the UC university campuses. And can they start this effort of collaboration so that we take our, in collaborating with the government of California, the commission, etc., and transferring this technology and this knowledge of mitigating climate change and air pollution. Just to give you one small example, we at UCSD we teamed up with CARB because our Air Resource Board has cut down the soot emissions by close to 90% in the last 40 years. The black carbon in the soot is the second largest contributor to climate change. So we said, how much of this technology is applicable to India? And we teamed up with the Indian government. Our Governor Brown initiated this collaboration. So now we have a program for India to adapt our technologies and governance policies to reduce the footprint from diesel. So I think in the climate change, that potential is huge. So that's one thing I would like us to explore. Yeah, I think in terms of this, how can California help the rest of the world? The subnational collaboration is important, but there are 4 components here. One is monitoring, right? And that's where we excel. We were able to tell how each policy in California cut down a particular air polluter. So we are starting that kind of monitoring process with our Indian colleagues. It's not gotten far yet, but we are starting that. And the second is the governance issue. How did California handle while we have our highly rigorous policies for emissions? Other states do not. So how do we deal with vehicles coming into the state? So these type of detailed technical issues is what we are discussing with the government of India.
Great. Next question is, what are you looking forward to learning about at this conference today and tomorrow?
Well, I want to maybe take a step back and just put this in a larger context in terms of climate science, because in a lot of the rest of the country, certainly in Washington, D.C., it's tough to be a climate scientist and tell the truth about what's happening. There's a great deal of attacking the messenger, and the messengers have bad news. And we have a very different approach in California. As you've heard already, the science is venerated, it's respected, it's relied on, and that's certainly a hallmark of this administration. It's not limited to this administration. We have great research universities here, and of course, a lot of innovative tech companies. We celebrate innovation and creativity. But this administration values science, whether it's on climate or relying on the California Council on Science and Technology to do a comprehensive study of a very controversial set of issues around fracking. And Governor Brown personally is very dedicated to relying on climate science. Professor Ramanathan's on his fabulous top 5 speed dial and gets called to go over what's latest findings on the 20,000 years ice age, meteorology and climate science. And you'll hear at lunch from Professors Barnowski and Hadley. The governor was reading an article in Nature about systems collapse, and he convinced them that it was important to rally scientists and have a consensus statement about the major threats that humanity's facing in the next several decades. So there's a very strong commitment on the part of this administration to dealing with science. And of course, there's a long tradition on climate science. It turns out 25 years ago or earlier, the legislature directed the Energy Commission to start studying the impacts of climate change. And I think it's very important to highlight, you'll hear this throughout and follow up with something that Bob said, the climate change assessments that have been done have been very important in shaping California policy. The first comprehensive climate assessment that was done in the early 2000s had a big showing the impacts under different scenarios, had a significant role in the passage of AB 32. It can't be underestimated. The second assessment in 2009 showing the economic impacts and that they could be lessened if we adapted had a big role in the 2009 adaptation strategy. The third one had a significant role in the 2014 Safeguarding California Plan. So we are really we continue to look to climate science as we go forward with these policies to help give us actionable ideas as we move forward. We're on the frontiers in terms of science and dealing with climate change and its impacts, particularly at the granular level where policy is made, at the local level, the regional level, and even at the state level, we need to have impacts that are not at the global level, however important they are, but at our level. So we're at the frontiers of science in California, as Dr. Ramanathan said, is at the frontiers of what policymakers are doing. So we are constantly looking for solutions and ideas about how to translate the findings of climate science into risks, where vulnerabilities are for communities, and the best ways to adapt to those risks. What are the best mitigation strategies? How do we best monitor and quantify greenhouse gas emissions as we start to deal with new sectors like agriculture and waste and emissions from the forestry sector? How do we measure and quantify those emissions? How do we come up with scalable solutions? What are the costs going to be? What are the socioeconomic impacts, particularly on disadvantaged communities? We're not making it up as we go along. We're not that improvisational, but we are on the frontiers of policy making. There's no models out there for dealing with problems this broad and difficult and economy-wide. So the science will play a very, very important role in going forward, and we really look to the research that's being done to give us this better understanding, this more finely grained information, the local impacts, and as I said, really actionable science. That's a theme of the research, the research group that Chair Weisenmuller referred to, and the fourth assessment that is about to get underway. The other point I would try to make is we really need partnerships with our research institutions. Dr. Ramanathan is chairing a group that President Napolitano at the UC President's Office is convening to come up with the 10 biggest ideas for how to deal with climate change in conjunction with UC's efforts to go carbon neutral by 2025. We, of course, need money from foundations and other sources. It's not always easy to go to universities, academics to ask for money. But the amount of money we can spend on research in the budget's limited, so we're looking for partnership ways to leverage the resources that others have, and really partnerships on these important questions.
Yeah, I think this meeting, I'm really looking forward to see what comes out of this meeting in terms of dealing with the multi-dimensional aspects of the drought. And the reason that's important is in the next 20, 25 years, we are going to see us shooting towards 2 degrees. We are already halfway there, about 9/10 of a degree. So there are two things happening. One is trend. On top of that, mapped on that is variability. 5-year drought or 6-year drought. And we are already seeing that we are caught unawares. The groundwater depleting beyond sustainable levels. How we come out of that, what adaptation measures we recommend, what California takes, is going to be tremendous importance to what's going to happen in areas like the Indo-Gangetic plains of India. Exactly the same thing is happening. The groundwater is being depleted. There is a drought gradually setting in. Same in Africa and parts of South America. So the reports you write and the steps we take is going to have tremendous global impact on how that future planet, which is not 100 years from now, 10 years from now, is going to deal with these changes. We are sort of on the forefront, not only in mitigation policy, we're on the forefront of sufferers of climate change.
And I would add that, the drought and the fires we're having are two good examples of how we need the research immediately. The forest fires, as Bob mentioned, that are engulfing the state are behaving like no forest fires before. They're not being fed by wind, but heat generated as a result of the drought. And the modeling that CAL FIRE doesn't explain how these forest fires work. So we need actionable information for this season, for next season, to deal with the inevitable forest fires. And the same thing with the drought. NASA's report last week showed subsidence is occurring at a more rapid rate than we thought. We passed a groundwater plant. Finally, California was regulating our groundwater resources last year, but we may need to very dramatically accelerate the implementation of that plan and come up with other strategies to deal with the behavior in response to the drought. So these are real-time solutions we need.
Let me just add a couple points there. One is, one of the things that I think on the science has been particularly important has been to take the IPCC scenarios and to be able to downscale those into California areas. And certainly the more we can continue that downscaling to connect again to the people's urban environments and let them see what the impacts are going to be, that's critical. I think the other thing to really flag for people is back on this question of diversity and environmental justice. I think in California, just the reality is that some of our least able to adapt citizens are going to be the hardest hit. The Central Valley. We are already with this drought busing water and food into the Central Valley. With so much of the agricultural land being left fallow, it's having very strong economic consequences there. And so certainly trying to, as we do all of this look for research, to design research that really can look out to all of our citizens and to cover the diversity of California, but also come up with ways to deal with mitigation adaptation for our disadvantaged communities is incredibly important. So I'd like to ask both of you in terms of what we can do in terms of the climate science, in terms of, again, getting that diversity in California.
Thank you. Let me add one other topic which has not come up in that regard. 3 weeks ago, the Lancet Commission, Lancet, as you know, is one of the most high-impact medical journals, they formed a commission, and that commission released a report, and it's easily one of the most shocking reports I have read. It's very difficult to shock me in terms of climate change. And it said that they think of public health effects of climate change as could be potentially one of the most devastating threats. And in fact, they said it has the potential of wiping out all of the developmental gains of the last several decades. So the health part has to feature in prominently, and I'm sure there are some sessions here on that aspect. So what can science do? I think one of the things I feel, even in climate science, we are still happily residing in our stovepipes. And so we need to start a little bit more, getting across our own disciplines. And I want to bring again the encyclical. And it talks about integral ecology, where natural systems are interacting with social systems, right? Social system is us, cars, energy commission, state governments, etc., etc. And the natural systems, you know what they are, the planet, the forest, this. And our models still don't do that. So we just give to our models increase in carbon dioxide. We don't tell our models why it's increasing. It's our behavior, right? And particularly the emission, 50% of the emission comes from just 1 billion people. Okay? And then the economics of that. Everything focused just on GDP, and we don't value the depletion of the natural capital. So our science needs to evolve to deal with the complexity of how we as human beings are interacting with nature.
Just to add, I would say there's a very receptive environment for research that informs policy in this area. And we think of our policies as both mitigation, adaptation, and research, three legs on a stool. And in each case, we are focused on protecting vulnerable communities, and we're looking for policies to help us achieve that outcome. The executive order specifically focuses on coming up with adaptation solutions that protect the most vulnerable communities. The research plan that I mentioned has that as an explicit focus of where we want to see agencies and research institutions focusing. Our mitigation efforts, we're lucky in California, as Dr. Ramanathan said, we have a statute that requires that 25% of cap and trade investment funds, which have to be spent on mitigation, be spent in disadvantaged communities. So we're looking for the best bang for the buck. We have programs on urban forestry, forest health, weatherization, low affordable housing, all those that are seeking to achieve that goal, but we're looking for synergistic projects that help on the mitigation adaptation front that achieve those benefits. We also have support in the state right now for spending money to mitigate the effects of the drought, which really is that's basically an early version of an adaptation strategy. We're already spending $2 billion, about to spend another $2 billion, and a lot of that money is focused on providing social services, or some of that money is providing social services for the most vulnerable who've been impacted by the drought, as well as improving public health systems, cleaning up contaminated water in disadvantaged communities. All that's to say that there's a receptive environment for science and research that gives us the ideas that we should follow up and implement these policies with.
I just want to ask both of you for one brief last question, which is, what is the urgency of action in this area?
I think we've said it already. Climate change impacts are happening right now. We see communities literally running out of water in the state. We see fires behaving as they've never behaved. We see extreme events here and right now. There's a very brief window of opportunity. We have the ability to influence what nations are doing in the next several decades. Right now, California and its research efforts and its mitigation and adaptation programs can play an important role, and we have to continue to be the leader in those areas.
Yeah, I strongly support what Cliff said. I think in terms of one area where I'd like to see a little bit more study and action on an urgent basis is, what would a 2 to 3 meter sea level rise? What does it mean for California if it happens this century? What are the coastal infrastructures? We have to relocate. I fly a lot, so I'm more worried about the airport. But I think it's come at that level now. We're not talking about 2200, 2300. We're talking about 2050 to 2100. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.